I could have called this presentation a few different things, that it might have been more flamboyant and got people more interested, like how not to get arrested while doing OSINT or other things. But really what I want the message of this presentation to be is how you, as a private individual or somebody else who works in law enforcement or who just wants to help in general, can get involved in all the different things that there are to do out there and the different ways that we can help. So just to start out, a little bit of my background, because it is important that you know where I'm coming from in this. As you probably read in the description, I am sworn law enforcement. I work for a large metropolitan police department in Las Vegas. So you don't need to be an OSINT expert to do the math on that one. So I work in cyber investigations and digital forensics. That's where a large part of my experience comes from. I am an academic as well, alumni of Wilmington University, and I do have a master's in cybersecurity as well, and I do teach from time to time. Coincidentally, actually not coincidentally, I'm also instructor for SEC487, which is the OSINT class for SANS. It's actually the only OSINT class for SANS right now, and I'm honored that SANS would have me teach that class from time to time. So let's get to the meat of it. Law enforcement by overall, it's changed quite a bit. And really the reason is because society has changed. You have traditional crimes such as bank robberies, for example. If I were to tell you that there was 3,000 bank robberies in 2018, you'd say, wow, that's a lot of bank robberies. Well, if I were to tell you that there was 7,500 bank robberies in 2004, then you would say, whoa, it's more than 60%. That's true. It's because, well, yeah, true, people are robbing banks less because law enforcement's got better at catching these people. But really, online crime has gotten easier. So it's really kind of directed crime away. And in the same year in 2018, the FBI actually reported over 300,000 victims of internet-related crimes. So that kind of tells you which way crime's going. You had 3,000 bank robberies, and you had 300,000, this is just reported crimes. And the crime stats have gone up so much that the FBI, they have a thing called UCR reporting, because it's Uniform Code Reporting. And what they did was they actually added on one just for internet crimes and victims, because those crimes really weren't getting captured before. Again, I'm in law enforcement. It takes us a while to adjust to new things, but that's what they went and did. And they're doing the right thing, because you really need to capture what's actually going on. So now in investigations, instead of somebody just going out to a crime scene and doing standard CSI type stuff, these investigations are so multifaceted. One of the things I do, as well as teach for SANS and also work as a detective, is that I also teach other detectives how to take advantage of things such as open source intelligence, and all these other things that are so multifaceted, where data lies, how we can get data, how people might be using technology. So the landscape has really dictated how I've had to adjust, and also how law enforcement has had to adjust to these problems. So back in 2006, there was a guy named Jeff Howe, and he more or less, as far as my research goes, kind of coined the term crowdsourcing. And he discovered that in this white paper that large groups, they get things done. And that's true. And in fact, law enforcement's been using crowdsourcing for a number of years. You remember the old West wanted posters. Crime Stoppers is a type of service that you call in and you give tips to the police. And then we talk about missing persons. If depends how old you are, you may or may not remember missing children on milk cartons, or on postcards. But this is traditionally how law enforcement has used crowdsourcing, but there's a better way. So when we talk about OSINT, we have to talk about the intelligence process. If you didn't know what OSINT meant before this, open source intelligence, it is data that is refined. So we take a large amount of data and we dwindle that down to something that's the most important thing, and it's there to answer a requirement. And not only does it have to answer a requirement, it also has to be timely. And on top of timely, you also have to be able to do something with it. Now, my previous 2 webinars I did for SANS, they were both based on OSINT and also digital forensics and how those 2 things work together to develop that timely, actionable intelligence that answers a requirement, that refines a large amount of data down. So when we're talking about these things, when it comes to finding answers, that's what it means. And groups tend to do this better. Now, I designed these hurdles, if you will. This is the best drawing of hurdles I can do. And I put the platform on top. And the reason I did that is because, in my opinion, I really think the platform is what develops both the trust and the resources when it comes to crowdsourcing intelligence for law enforcement. So if you have a platform to which to operate, in other words, well, let's talk about this first. Here's what's probably not the best platform. Subreddits, Facebook groups, places like that, those are all great places to socialize. But if you watch the Netflix documentary, Don't F with Cats, I think they call it, that was a great documentary. I think they had a lot of good OSINT methodology there. But really, that sort of, I would say that sort of approach to doing OSINT was a little reckless in the fact that they didn't have really any sort of law enforcement buy-in. Now, that's nobody's fault, but the group in which they were doing was not really meant to do that sort of thing. In other words, if they had some information, they had no idea who to give it to. So when law enforcement gets this information from private citizens and they don't know kind of where it came from, they don't have that trust. And also, when it comes to giving that information to from private citizens, the private citizens also don't have the resources. So when we have both resources and trust, we can create a platform. And we're going to talk about a couple different platforms later on that I'm a huge fan of, I'm a supporter of, and I also volunteer my time towards. And I really hope that you guys will look into those too. Law enforcement overall, I know in the news that there's been a lot of civil unrest. This webinar was actually written pre-COVID and pre-civil unrest, and so I didn't change the webinar at all because everything is still relevant. We still have over 18,000 local police agencies here in the United States, and what they're really lacking is employees that can actually do the job of doing things like finding people and taking large amounts of data, turning that into intelligence. And overall, if departments have a platform which they can operate within, they welcome crowdsourcing. We see that they've already been using it for a number of years. It just depends how we present that to them and how comfortable they are. And we're going to talk about ways that they can become we can become comfortable with that. So you have 2 different sides. In any relationship, it's a 2-way road. And law enforcement, they're mainly concerned about 3 things. Number 1 is always liability. The big block between law enforcement sharing information to the civilian side is they're concerned about what will happen to the data or the intelligence. They're concerned about what might happen if someone gets involved that they shouldn't or gets hurt, and they're always concerned about these things. So that's always their number 1 concern. Now, when we bring, in law enforcement, when you have evidence, and you do things like, so OSINT really comes down to cyber forensics. It's kind of delved into that. And you think about the word forensic, in Latin it actually means for court. So you're developing, it doesn't mean anything else besides that, just cyber stuff for court. So when we're bringing that information and you can use that for an actual case, they're concerned about the source of the intelligence. So they need to know that it's a solid lead or it's a reliable lead. And then when they get that information and they develop that intelligence, they have to have a way to control it, because now that they've collected it, this is now evidence. And it's just like impounding someone's vehicle that was part of a crime or a gun that's part of a crime. They want to keep these things in their original state, and they don't want to have anybody accuse them of impropriety, because that's a big thing right now is developing that trust between police and the private sector. Now on the civilian side, they don't care about liability. People just want to help. But what they want is they want to be considered inclusive in the process. So they want to know the context. So if somebody's missing or if somebody needs help, it's really hard to help out anybody if you don't understand what it is that they need to be done. They also want to know, just like the documentary Don't F with Cats, one overarching theme is the participants always wanted to know what was the status of the case. Every time a new thing in the case happened, they were so excited. And they should be, because it's part of the investigative process. I'm an investigator, and when I have something that happens that's exciting, I'm very excited. And if I didn't get those constant updates, then I wouldn't be very immersed into the process. And finally, civilians are also worried about, hey, am I going to get arrested from this situation? Because if you're going to go back to, people like white hat hackers and people that have really good intentions, they'll find a vulnerability on someone's website or something like that. They'll disclose it to them privately, like they should. And then there's been times in the past where they have gone and been arrested. Now, is it the fault of the police? I don't know. Is it the fault of the laws that exist? Maybe. But what it comes down to is the police and the public have to have some sort of understanding that, hey, if you stay within these rules, then you're going to be okay. And that's what people, I think, talking to people in this situation, that they are really concerned about. So we talked about a model, a platform in which we're going to trade this information. And of course, like anything, people want responses, and it has to be two-way comms in between. So if you notice these arrows here that I kind of put on here, by the way, this is not my model, these arrows back and forth. This model is actually made up by a gentleman by the last name of Asar. His first name's Kamal. I might be totally butchering his name, but he wrote a white paper that he included this graphic, and it's called OSINT by Crowdsourcing. And what he did was a very good white paper, didn't get a lot of fanfare, but I found a lot of good things from it. So in this situation, we would have a relationship that ordinary people, volunteers, could provide information to law enforcement through an intermediary. Now, that intermediary could be a representative of law enforcement, or it could be another company, but it's a way to have that information go back and forth. So not only do the police have the information, but so do the volunteers, and they're able to share this information back and forth through some sort of proxy or an administrator. Now, this is productive because both sides really get what they want. And to my knowledge, this hasn't happened all that much, but we're going to talk about a couple groups, and I keep alluding to this, but there's a couple groups that are doing this really well right now, and we're going to talk about them. So Interpol has a platform. If you're not familiar with Interpol is, you can Google it, but international law enforcement, they have a couple different types of notices. So they put these red notices out. And what the red notices are, this is like fugitives. It could be people that need to be found right now. And they put these out for people to basically, hey, if you have any information on these people, please find them. And they'll provide a picture, they'll provide some sort of last place seen. There's a decent amount of context there. There's also yellow notices. So sometimes you just they'll have things like, they need to identify some sort of a picture or something that's in some sort of a context of a video or something like that, but usually it's images. And those are more kind of a long-term things that are on fire at the moment and that they need help with. So what they do with these things is they turn around and they submit these leads to a local law enforcement that they may be helping out. And again, this isn't just US, this is all around the world. So you could be sitting in your chair in your office in Kansas City, and you could help out somebody in London, England. That's one of the really cool things about it. For me, there's no back and forth here. It's I kind of need that to know that, you know, my efforts are being done somewhere, and there's not a lot of ability for things to go back and forth here and to tell me if I'm getting close to something, but there's definitely some challenges there that we can help out Interpol with. So when we talk about Europol, Europol has this really cool thing that they do. This is kind of an older picture right here, and this is just a shirt, and of course it's kind of looks weird because this is a child, and they have to cut the information out because it's very, very sensitive, and this is a minor and we can't show their faces. And what they do is they trace certain objects from images, and they say, hey, can you tell me what this shirt is from? Because they get these images, and I've been doing digital forensics for a long time. We'll get images and there's no metadata, there's nothing that goes along with the image. So it's on me to try to figure out, okay, so what's this logo on? If I was, you know, somebody who was going to buy this shirt, where would I even purchase this thing from? What part of the world is it from? I have no idea. And then what are these things over here? I don't know. But that's what they ask people to do, is try to find out, hey, what's are in these pictures? Can you help us out? The problem here for me, again, is there's not a lot of context. It's very difficult to do these things. With that said, they have a lot of successful cases where people are able to give them really good leads. But again, submitting to the website, there's not a lot of back and forth. They might get back to you if you have something good or they want to follow up with you, but it doesn't have that element of the element that the SAR made, that model that says, hey, let's go back and forth and really talk about these things. So speaking of back and forth, I'm going to take a little bit of time on this slide because I'm a huge fan of Trace Labs. Trace Labs is crowdsourcing missing persons. And they have these OSINT search parties. So what they do is they have these big, sometimes worldwide events, sometimes local events, and they'll take certain people that have been missing, fairly, you're not going to get somebody that was missing yesterday, but you're probably not getting somebody who was missing, you know, a year ago. So you're going to get somewhere in the middle as far as people that need to be found. So these are active missing person cases. And so I'll tell you from at least the law enforcement perspective in the United States is missing persons. There's so many missing persons. I don't have the numbers on them, but our missing persons department is busy all the time. And there is no humanly possible way they can work every single one of those every single day. Meanwhile, you have parents and family members and friends that are worried about these people, that really just, they want some sort of closure, or they want to know this person's okay. So some of these people, they go missing on purpose, and some people are abducted. We don't know on all these situations. So the great thing about Trace Labs is that they provide this platform. And this platform says, hey, you can have a team, and we have X amount of targets here. When I say targets, I mean missing persons. And you tell me everything you can about these particular individuals. Give me their social media, like a last place they were seen, people and their family. Start naming all these things, and each one's kind of given different points. And Micah Hoffman, the teacher of SEC487, and actually the creator of SEC487, principal instructor for SANS. I'm sitting in his class today doing as a teaching assistant, and he mentioned something today about Trace Labs OSINT search parties. It's not important if you win. Yeah, it's great. You get the cool badges and stuff, and I want a black badge and all that other stuff, but you know, that's not really what it's about. This is about helping people. And if you can earn a cool digital badge in the process, sure, it's great. But this is about helping people, straight up, just helping people. Trace Labs and all these places I'm talking about, they're all nonprofit. They're not here to monetize a lot of this stuff. They're just here to really do the right things. And that's why I'm so bullish on all these organizations, because they're truly doing the right thing. When we talk about other organizations that are more kind of law enforcement centric, we talk about National Child Protective Task Force. Kevin Metcalf over at National Child Protection Task Force is a good friend of mine. They find abducted children and child predators. That's some pretty heavy stuff. It's that one level up from, actually a few levels up from missing persons. And they engage law enforcement industry partners to do this. So in anything in this world in these days, nobody has enough resources to do it on their own. And when we go back and we think about 18,000 law enforcement agencies, I work for a very large law enforcement agency, and I am blessed that I have so much resources to do my job and find the bad people and do the right thing. The rest of the 17,999 police forces, they don't have these sort of training, experience, tools, resources, and that's where NCPTF comes in. So you ask yourself, how can I, so you understand how you can get involved in the trace labs, you sign up for an OSINT search party. Well, how can I get involved in NCPTF? Well, the short answer is that you can either give your own money, which is great because they are a nonprofit. You could also do things like approach them and say, I have a certain, if you develop OSINT tools and things like that, they're always open to expanding their tools and using those to help find abducted children and child predators. One organization that I'm really excited about is the AntiHuman Trafficking Intel Initiative. Now, this is truly a partnership with law enforcement in the private sector, because ATII takes intelligence and looks at human trafficking, not just from the human trafficking side, but from the anti-money laundering side. If you look at their website at the bottom, I love their website. It's called followmoneyfightslavery.org. Wow, that's powerful. That says it all right there. Because what I find in what I do is that it's always about money. Cyber attacks, people hurting people, a lot of these things, it's always kind of centered around money. And nothing's more true that's centered around money than the awful epidemic of human trafficking that we have worldwide. So what ATII does is they look at things from a very broad perspective. They partner with in the financial industry. Obviously, money laundering is a big key to solving the problem of human trafficking. And with that comes, cryptocurrencies and cyber forensics and all kinds of things that you need to combat these things with. But what they also do is they develop profiles in certain parts of the world on what is their issue with human trafficking, because it's not a one-size-fits-all thing. So what might be going on in the United States is much different than might be going on in South Africa. And so they have what they call experteers, and I'm an experteer for ATII, I'm proud to say that. So they have these experteers that they go and develop either material for them to work with other banks, or maybe for a certain region of the world. So if you have a certain expertise that you might think is helpful to ATII, you can go and volunteer over at followmoneyfightslavery.org. It's a worthwhile cause. So if you want to get involved, you don't need cyber experience necessarily. That's not even what it's about. If you have cyber experience, great. If you have coding experience, great. They can use all of those things because it's a very well-rounded organization. If you look at their little badge here on the side, man, it's encompassing a lot of things. But I can't say enough good things about ATII and what they're doing in the community right now. And there's a lot of good things to come from them. So when I said in the beginning that I could have named this how not to get arrested while doing OSINT, well, I wasn't kidding, because that's a lot of what people are concerned about. So in law enforcement, we have a duty to the community, and I see some of your questions there on the side, and I'll get to the questions at the end of the presentation. So there are certain things that they should be doing and certain things that they shouldn't be doing. One thing is you got to be present. Is because going with that two-way road, it's got to be back and forth. People have to feel like their voice has value to it and that they're going to get something back. The other thing they want to know is there's got to be this is a big talk about it these days. Hey, why isn't this transparent? And I get that a lot when I have victims of things, and we can't be transparent all the time on an active investigation. But at least in things like where Trace Labs does is missing persons, we can update people saying, hey, we think we might have, helped this case do X, Y, and Z. Thanks, everybody. And we can see real results like, hey, we submitted all these leads to law enforcement. Look how awesome this is. And Trace Labs does an amazing job of showing that graphically, man. When I see that graph and it just like starts from left to right and it just grows, it's just awesome looking, like, wow, all the information and detail that went into there to create that. But one thing law enforcement also has to do is they have to be very clear about the rules of engagement. And when we say rules of engagement, we say, okay, we need you to do a thing for us, whether it's missing persons, or maybe one day law enforcement could ask for help for maybe somebody did a burglary or something along those lines. And they say very specifically, we do not want you reaching out to the victim or the family. Well, they need to be very explicit about that in their language so that we are being both transparent and also honest with people and what we can and cannot have them do. Because again, it all comes back to liability. So we need to also provide context. So when we don't provide context and when we hoard results, then we kind of cut people out of the process. So those are things we as a law enforcement, and I don't know if there's any law enforcement listening to this. I hope there is a couple, and we can talk later, but those are things that we absolutely cannot do. And then third, if we have rules of engagement, we can't prosecute volunteers. We really should stray away from that. And I don't think that any of I'm going to go back to Trace Labs again. I don't think any volunteers at Trace Labs has ever been prosecuted, but the opportunity is there if somebody really wanted to go out of their way to do something, either to win or do something along those lines, or you just can't predict people. But for the most part, I think people are good. So prosecuting volunteers should be the very last thing that we as in law enforcement should be thinking about. Now, we said it's a two-way road. So participants, citizens, volunteers, you have duties too. So when we're doing something like a Trace Lab thing, and I've been a judge before, and what I really love when I get information from people, because I'm thinking about it as, not necessarily grading things about points. I'm just trying to, match things up and be fair. But when people tell a story and they really make me understand why that is intelligence and not just data, that's what really makes that special and important. And when you get that information, your ability to pivot on that data, to learn how one piece of data leads to another, that's really what makes you successful in this, and that is what makes this process valuable. And as we said before, unless you are explicitly authorized, you can't take active measures. We talk about active measures in Trace Labs events, and we talk about things about resetting victims' passwords on their maybe their Facebook accounts. We absolutely can't do that because one, we don't know who's controlling those. We don't know if law enforcement is up on an active pen register, which is like a trap and trace thing where they can tell who's has what activity on an account, and we don't really know what the true context of what our actions are going to do later on. So whatever you're doing, if you feel like you're going in the gray zone, ask somebody. When participants come to me as a judge and they say, hey, can we do this? Then we can have a back and forth and we can say, well, no, you can't do that, but you could probably do this instead. And then they have an idea of what their role is or what they can do and stay within that area. Because again, I think people are good rather than bad, and people are going to do what they think is the right thing to do. So instead of just talking about these companies, we should probably talk about a couple successes that are out there. And there's just so many, I had to pick a couple, but I really like this William Moult story. So William Moult, he went missing in 1997 when he was 40 years old. As the story goes, he actually, the police knew that he went clubbing or something along those lines, and nobody ever heard from him again. So they had this picture here, this is an aerial photo. This is just from Google Maps. So they had this aerial photo, and the guy that kind of lived somewhat in the neighborhood, was just kind of looking over this the aerial part here, and he saw something weird. He said, "Hey, what is this thing in the water right here?" And then he zoomed in and he said, "Wait a second. Okay, what is that?" Then he did a little more open source intelligence, and he found that, hey, there was actually a guy that went missing here a long time ago, and they never found him or his car. So he called the police, and the police came out and found him. So when did this happen? So the guy went missing in 1997. This guy actually was just found this in 2019, if you can believe that. In fact, on Google Maps, this has been visible since 2007. But again, there's not enough resources that police or anybody has to scour all these things and find these. So this is an amazing find, but this is an example, excuse me. This is an example of what we can do together, and we can really make a difference and find these people and help these families come to a closure. So at the end of it, William Bolt, he wasn't murdered. He actually, they believe he fell asleep in his car, and his car rolled backwards into the water, and he died that way. It's very tragic, but that was the story behind that. Excuse me, I'm losing my voice here. So, all right. Another great organization I love for OSINT, and if you ever have a chance, get involved with Belencat. Belencat is an investigative journalism company. They're not old like most of these other news companies. They're very independent, and they take on these kind of, I guess I would call, hard luck cases. So there was this child in East Aleppo getting bombed. I'm not going to go into the entire history behind Aleppo, but it's a place getting bombed, and yes, the Russians are involved. And while this girl was putting out tweets on Twitter and also on Facebook, the Russians continued to Russian intelligence continued to question the veracity of if this person actually existed. So they went and said, well, hey, this girl right here, she's not a real person. That's just some stock photo they pulled up. And then Nick Waters at Belencat said, hold my beer, and went out and was able to geolocate using photos like this. Another photo of her standing here, exactly where this is on the block, and proving and showing that, analyzing tweets and Facebook posts, that like, it's true that some of those posts were by her mother, but it is also true that she was making some of those posts herself. And in fact, she is a real person. She has a real family, and there's a real crisis going on. There was a real crisis going in East Aleppo. And so rather than take away from the, I guess, the freedom of the speech of this particular girl and her family, Belencat is a great group that stepped in and helped out and gave them a voice when they really don't truly have a voice, and they are not as lucky as we are in other places in the world. So what's the benefits of all this? I mean, we're talking about volunteer work. So sometimes there's not a lot of reward in it. You don't hear back and things like that. But even if you're doing things like tracing an object for Europol or tracing an object for Interpol, you're still able to sharpen your skills. There's so many things to learn out there. You'd be amazed. In fact, if you get involved with some of these groups like Trace Labs, you're even getting access to free training and tools and methods that you otherwise would not have had access to. To top that off, I have to personally say that I'm part of the OSINT community and also the law enforcement community, but the OSINT community is one of the best out there. You can't find a better group of people that just want to help each other get better. There's not a lot of closely held secrets. We're not going to tell people how we can do a certain Facebook search or something like that. Now, there's a couple things we kind of have to keep close to the belt because we don't want to tell everything. But for the most part, you have so many free tools and so many free resources and so many people out there that just to help out in things like places like Twitter and other chat places that people meet up, is, including Discord servers, is that you always have somebody there to help you. And that's really one of the greatest benefits of being involved in the OSINT community. I get people all the time. Now, I'm an established professional myself, And I get people and students, some of my students that I teach, and they ask all the time, hey, how can I get a job? How can I use this later on? Well, all the skills that you're going to learn in OSINT are completely relevant to in the fields like digital forensics, which is where I started, cyber forensics, investigating money laundering, investigating all kinds of things for private investigations. You can be, involved in threat hunting. There's so many things that it crosses over that just building your skills on a daily basis, doing things like, using Linux VMs like the ones that I'm going to use TraceLabs again. TraceLabs has an OSINT VM that is Linux based. If you don't know about that, it's free. You get to go use it, and then now you can say you have experience with that once you've been using it. So there's really way more benefits to any of this than there are things that, yeah, it's hard work, but there's way more benefits, and those outweigh everything. So where do we go from here? I gave you all these examples and places that you can do things. Like I said, my good friend Micah Hoffman, in more or less in charge of OSINT Curious. He doesn't like to overplay his hand on that, but Micah and a few others, Nick's Intel, a lot of other people out there are responsible for OSINT Curious. I have a couple posts on there, not many. OSINT Combine, which is also a partner with TraceLabs. These are all great places to go. As you know, SEC 487 is also an OSINT course, and it's a 6-day course. And we cover everything that you need to know to get the basics of OSINT. So if you work for an employer, you have an opportunity that you want to expand your skills and maybe provide value to your organization, this is a great class to take, especially if you don't have a lot of experience in this area. So I'm going to look through the questions here and see what we got. So James wanted to know what was define resources. So I need some context here. James, can you post something else there so I can understand that better? Yes, Brad wanted to know if the white paper I was talking about was the cybercrimejournal.com. I don't know if that's a free version of it, but yes, that does sound like it. It looks like a SARS name is on it. And I would recommend that anyone give that a read if you're interested in this sort of thing. I'm going to go ahead and post that in the chat so that everybody else has it too. So, okay. So Patrick wants to know, has anybody applied CNN, which is neural network money laundering against ML, I'm guessing, against these, no, not money laundering, CNN ML against these child image objects? So we're talking about, facial recognition, I'm guessing you're meaning. Now, it's a very sticky area. So when you want to talk about child images, introducing those to out in the wild is a no-no. NCMEC, NCMEC is what houses all the different, what they call hashes on these images that people find in different online forums and digital forensics, and it flags things as what they call innocent images. So I don't know if they've applied that. It would probably be a really good situation within a very closed situation like NCMEC, which I'm not sure if they're working on. I'm not part of that. But across the internet, maybe people are. I'll just say this, that there's a lot of internet providers that are out there that are very concerned about the problem of children being abused. And so they do give law enforcement leads and things like that. And that may be one of the ways that they do that. But again, I don't work in innocent images and those types of investigations on a regular basis, so I can't speak to that. Okay. So when appropriate, how can a person be submitted to TraceLabs as a target? So usually what we'll do is before we have an event, depends if it's a local event or if it's a worldwide event, and we'll reach out to a few different police departments and ask them if they have anybody that they would like us to find. Now, there's nothing wrong with approaching Trace Labs and saying, hey, there's a person that's very near and dear to me that's missing. Can you help? I'm going to say they are probably going to help. With that said, they're going to probably do some kind of ask you some questions about, hey, well, what's the situation in which the person's missing? How long they've been missing? What's your relationship to them? Because what they don't want to be is a service for people, just like a private investigative service, where somebody really may not be missing. I'm not saying that anybody here would do something like that, but Trace Labs, being the good people that they are, they're going to do their due diligence to make sure that that they're looking for people who are truly missing. Let's read this. Trying to read this with with not reading the entire thing to you guys. Yeah, so there's kind of a comment about someone's spouse works in a hotel and they volunteer for a local chapter of a group that's similar to ATII, the Anti-Human Trafficking, and they teach them to look for signs that people, or children or women or whoever it is, might be victims of human trafficking. And this person is saying that it's a huge success in the area. And thank you for mentioning that. Yes, it is a huge success. And that's one of the big things that both ATII and NCPTF do, is a large part of this is the prevention, the education of it, because you can only do so much in hindsight. And so the big thing they have is outreach, and the only way they get outreach is people like us helping out and spreading the word. Even if you don't have somebody close to you that's been abducted or is missing or anything like that, these are great places to keep mentioning because they do really good work. Do I know about PPDM, which is privacy preservation data mining? A way to reveal things with a asterisk stuff where person revealing is protected. I am not familiar with that. I might need a little more context. Maybe I don't understand PPDM as an acronym as you're saying it. So if you can resubmit there, Patrick, I'd take a look at it. So are there any good training opportunities for OSINT? I'm glad you asked that. Yes, we just mentioned those. The great thing about the internet now versus when I grew up is that everything's just out there. If you get onto Twitter and you follow people like WebReacher, Clipster, by the way, I'm at Blue Bloodhound, the French blue, not the regular blue. If you follow people like that on Twitter, you're just gonna fall into like this entire world of OSINT. If you go to places like OSINTcombine.com, that has a ton of free tools, places like intelx.io, which also has a ton of free tools, you just start learning these things. And we do a lot of these OSINT presentations from time to time, and I'd recommend catching all of it that you can. Also getting involved in maybe your local groups and things like that. Any sort of exposure you can put yourself in is going to put you in a good position. And I'll just say this, we're going to go back to Trace Labs. It's not about winning. It's about your experience, and it's about what you can do to help somebody. So although you may not score the most points, that doesn't matter. That's not the big thing. The one lead that you could have found that nobody else could have found, that was the thing that helped find that person. And do you get a medal for it? No, but you can walk away saying, hey, I did the right thing. And so just think about that. All right. Thanks, Sam. Somebody said it's free. I don't know what that is. Yes, machine learning. Okay, sorry, I'm a little slow. Where do we start? I'm gonna paraphrase. Where do we start learning training for money laundering and finding people and stuff online? Well, okay, so finding people online, going back to Trace Labs, good experience there. It's a practice makes perfect thing. So the great thing about a lot of these events is that they kind of give a little debrief at the end and kind of say, hey, we kind of found these certain things. And when you get involved in these groups, people will also give you feedback. Now, when it comes to money laundering, that's a very difficult thing to get involved with because there's so many different types of money laundering, which is, I do a lot of that in my work. A lot of it's, what I do is, search warrants and all these other things that we do with banks. But OSINT is a large part of it. When we talk about imports and exports, what I would do is start reading about money laundering, the different types of money laundering. When we talk about different payment systems out there, learning about crypto is great. Is great training. Unfortunately, getting trained in cryptocurrency isn't always that affordable. But if you're with groups like ATII, they can provide sometimes discounted training and things like that. You can be part of that and get the benefit of that. And really reading these things at places like ATII and other places, the things that the products that they make. So they're made for education, and they're also made to make you aware, not just, to learn about the thing that happened, but make you aware that these things are actually going on in certain parts of the world. So Patrick was saying, okay, we're kind of going back and forth. I'm sorry, Patrick, I keep kind of messing up. So unsupervised learning, so no hashes. So I agree, yeah. So that takes, so when we go back to the innocent images and using machine learning for that, so the big issue with that is how do we contain that data and how do we make sure that it doesn't get out and that we continually add to it. I'm sure that some federal agency is probably applying some sort of machine learning and things like that. It's just that I'm not 100%, I can't direct you and say like, yeah, they're for sure doing that. But that, given that we have the ability to do things like that, those are great things. Now, on a side note, groups like ATII, they're also out there. They scrape data from what we consider human trafficking sites, like prostitution sites and things like that. And they share that data with, law enforcement partners and also private partners. And they do those things so that they can continue fighting the crime of human trafficking. And there's just so many different ways that you can go about it. Trace Labs has a process. Yes, they do. Yes, they do. And they have a great process. What is the best method to part with your local law enforcement? And that's a really good question. It depends, obviously which country you're in, what sort of size of local municipality that you work in. Some departments, they offer what they call like a reserve position, and they have things like that open. Now, I don't know what sort of access they can give you to things like that, but when we talk about getting involved in these groups, they give you, they've built the trust with law enforcement that you're going to need to get involved in these more detailed things. And, my ultimate goal is doing talks like this is more, not necessarily, pumping you guys up for OSINT, but really getting law enforcement into that and getting into that mode where we can trust people and we can all work together and solve these problems, because there's a lot of problems out there. So I would say getting involved in these groups and talking to people that are in law enforcement, by, calling up and saying, hey, is there a way I can volunteer or do this? That may not be available, but it could become available eventually. So it's kind of a hard question to answer. PPDM is based on, I'm just going to read this, is based on zero knowledge proofs used to reveal information without revealing who you are, okay, for these volunteers to provide info and not get charged. Okay, yeah, so this is another example of crowdsourcing, and again, it comes down to, who can we let give access to information to, how can we safeguard this information. Some of these investigations especially for human trafficking and these heinous crimes, someone wrote, I'm awful, but someone wrote a great article on OSINT Curious about the effects that this can have on you as an investigator that you're doing these things. You see some bad stuff in digital forensics and OSINT. So it's an interesting concept, and I'd like to see if that could work. I don't know what they cannot be backtracked means. Sorry. Okay. What are some publicly visible information? Oh, Minsu. Hello, Minsu. What are some publicly visible information that's related to small, mid, large business owners? Doing research on fake or fraudulent companies and abusing COVID fraud, and was wondering if there's any way to identify with OSINT, okay? Such as their publicly available number of employees, headquarters. Great. So there are, I can't go through all the different sites, but each municipality typically takes these businesses, so people registered for business licenses, and the counties or the local municipality or the state, they will register those things. And sometimes they'll give you things like, well, hey, this is the president of this thing. This person is an officer. And what you can do is, again, it's pivoting off of data, is sometimes you can find these certain people that maybe you have a lead where there's a company that money might be funneling through it. And you'll see that this company doesn't have, this is what I look for. This company doesn't have a real web presence, or the web presence is weak. In other words, like it just doesn't look legit at all. And you think to yourself, well, what legitimate purpose does this place do? What do they do for a living? So if you can't answer those questions, that you might be on the right lead. I'll say that most of the business information out there is actually free. And then you're doing things like, gathering phone numbers and gathering all that kind of information. And we talk a lot about a lot of that in SEC 487 about taking data from multiple places and turning it into intelligence. And that's really the basis of investigations and also OSINT. So good question, Minsu. Process for submitting subjects. Okay, so I think it's gonna be the last question here. So is making sock puppets for OSINT a gray area? Or is the gray area what you are doing with the sock puppet? Yes and yes. So yeah, so for sure, when you're making a sock puppet for any social media, you're almost always violating every single term of service that that nobody reads. So you go on there and they want you to give all of your personal information that's correct, because yeah, they want to sell that information, but they also want to be a legit website where they have real people having real interactions. So it's for sure, it's a gray area. Is it illegal? Not that I'm aware of in the United States, but what you don't want to do is you don't want to pretend that as if you're law enforcement or military or some sort of person like that in a position of law enforcement or authority, because that can kind of get you into hot water. With that said, just making a sock puppet and passively looking at people's profiles and things like that, that's not really a gray area, except for violating the terms of service for a website. And really the only thing they can do is kick you off. They do that all the time. Facebook's probably cleaning all kinds of Facebook sock puppets off as we speak right now. I had 4 killed in one day, so rest in peace, sock puppets. But the gray area that you're going to do with sock puppets, though, is when you get into these active engagements where you're messaging people and you're pretending to be someone else. That's where you get into the gray area, because your municipality, your local area, especially if you're law enforcement, especially if you're doing something for trace labs, no, please don't do that, because that's one of the areas. But it's a good question. There's certainly gray areas to be there, and it's always, like I said before, best to ask before you do those things. I appreciate that question. So, well, if you guys don't have anything else, we'll probably end this presentation, and I appreciate everybody coming out. I implore you to go to all these different resources, volunteer where you can, do the right thing, and see how you can make a difference out there, because it doesn't matter what your technical ability is. It doesn't matter how smart you think you are or how not smart you think you are. You have the ability to add value and to help someone else out. So I ask that you guys Oh yes, Sarah, there's a CTF on August 8th, and I'm looking forward to it too. And I ask that you do those things, and I thank you for your time. Thanks, guys.